Tánaiste, by any standards, Louise O'Keefe is an extremely courageous woman. Abused as a young child, no doubt deeply traumatised as a result, blocked, bullied, browbeaten and threatened by the state, she never lay down. She took her case to the European Court of Human Rights, and that court ruled this week, as you know, that the Irish state is directly liable for the inhuman and degrading treatment of an 8-year-old girl, and that further this state offered that girl, now an adult, no remedy for that abuse. Indeed, Tánaiste, the court could have gone much further. It could have said correctly that this state prevented any degree of fairness, justice or resolution of this case for Louise. So now, Tánaiste, the responsibility and liability of this state in this case has now been firmly established. I hear in the last minutes that Taoiseach has said some words of apology to Louise, and that is to be welcomed. It should be said, however, that given the enormity of the wrong done to this woman and others, that those words of apology should have been uttered here in the chamber of the Dáil. Tánaiste, can you tell me, does that apology extend to those other victims of abuse in primary schools? I understand that 135 other adults had previously brought cases similar to those of Louise O'Keefe, claiming the Department of Education and that the state did not provide protection and had a liability for the abuse they suffered. And as you know, following the Supreme Court judgment in 2008 taken by Ms O'Keefe, they received threatening letters telling them they would face legal costs unless they dropped their cases.
Thank you.
So is that threat now removed, Tánaiste? And also, Tánaiste, can you tell me why this government, your government, last year argued before the European Court that this state had no liability for what happened to children like Louise O'Keefe?
Thank you.
How is it on your behalf that officials and council were sent on behalf of the state and this government to again attempt to face down this courageous woman?
Tánaiste.
Louise O'Keefe should never have been subjected to abuse. She should have had a carefree childhood, and I think her case reminds us of the shocking scale of historical abuse and failures and inaction to protect children. I admire Louise O'Keefe, and I join with the Taoiseach in apologising to her for what happened in that school and for the horrendous experience that she had to go through. We have the judgment from the European Court of Human Rights. It's a very substantial judgment. It's about 82 pages of a judgment. We will be discussing that judgment at the government meeting next Tuesday. But this is a government that has also addressed very clearly and very comprehensively the whole issue of the protection of children. It is absolutely and without question a priority for this government. We have now created a dedicated Department of Children and Youth Affairs. We've held a referendum on children's rights. Within the education sector, all schools are required to adhere to child protection procedures, which give direction and guidance to school authorities and school personnel in the implementation of Children First when dealing with allegations and suspicions of child abuse. All primary schools now fully implement the Stay Safe programme, which plays a valuable role in helping children to develop the skills necessary to enable them to recognise and resist abuse and potentially abusive situations. The Child and Family Agency is being officially launched today. It will be the first agency dedicated to supporting our children and families and to promoting the development, welfare and protection of our children. Minister Fitzgerald has published updated Children First guidelines and led a national effort to improve awareness of the need to report child protection concerns, leading to a major increase in reports, indeed up by a third on 2011. Minister Fitzgerald has also published the Heads of the Children First legislation. The revised bill will be published in March. The legislation will place obligations on professionals and organisations working with children to report suspected child protection concerns, to share information and to engage in interagency and multidisciplinary working. The Minister for Justice has also commenced the Criminal Justice Withholding of Information on Offences Against Children and Vulnerable Persons Act 2012, and it is now the responsibility of every member of society to protect and defend children from sexual and other abuse. It is no longer acceptable and should never have been accepted that secrecy or ignorance on the part of those with knowledge of what were criminal offences could protect those who perpetrated those crimes. We will, as I say, be considering the implications of the judgment at the government meeting on Tuesday.
Thank you. Deputy McDonald.
Not alone should Louise O'Keefe not have suffered abuse at the tender age of 8 in what should have been a very safe environment of her primary school. Louise O'Keefe should not have been harangued, bullied and threatened by the state. And I'm sure you will agree with me on that point. But that is precisely what happened through the High Court, to the Supreme Court and as far as the European Court for Human Rights. And Tánaiste, it was your government on your behalf that argued the case against Louise O'Keefe as recently as a year ago. And that draws a very serious question mark over what you would call child abuse being a historical issue. You list your many achievements legislatively, and let me applaud them. They're long overdue and very necessary. But so too is a necessary sea change in terms of how the state responds to the Louise O'Keefes of this world, because there's an established pattern that the state and government close ranks and try to shut down any call for justice from people like Louise O'Keefe. And let it be said that all of the protections that now exist and that are now contemplated are a direct result of brave people like Louise O'Keefe stepping forward. So can you answer my question? I asked you whether or not the Taoiseach's apology and your apology extend to all victims of abuse in primary schools.
Thank you.
I want to know, and I'd like to hear you say very clearly on the record today, that you now, your government and the state now, fully accepts that the state has a liability for the abuse suffered by all of these survivors, and that indeed the state has a liability for any current or future instances of abuse of that nature. We can all agree.
Deputy, please, would you recognise the chair? Thank you.
Of this judgment, but what we need to hear now from government is clear words.
Deputy, you didn't hear me. You're way over your time.
Apology to one and all.
Well, first of all, again, I make it very clear that we apologise to Louise O'Keefe. She should not have suffered what she suffered, and apologise to her for what occurred in that school. As you know, as you know, the Supreme Court handed down a judgment on this case. I think it was actually 2009, certainly before, sometime before we came into office, and that was the legal position at the time. As you know, when you raised the issue about the state accepting liability for current and for future cases, what happens in our schools, I think there are very significant implications in the European Court of Human Rights judgment. We've had a system in this country of schools operating under a system of patronage. My understanding of the Supreme Court judgment in 2009 was that it accepted that system of patronage, and that therefore ultimate liability did not rest with the state. The judgment of the European Court of Human Rights, in my view, has very serious implications for the relationship between the state and the patronage of our schools. As you know, the Minister for Education has already undertaken a process of considering the whole issue of patronage of our schools.
Thank you.
I think that issue is now going to be given an added significance by the judgment in this case, but that is obviously one of the issues, and you raised particularly about what will the situation be for current and for future responsibility by the state. That's among the issues that government will have to consider arising out of this judgment. I believe that the implications of it are very profound for the patronage system of schools and for the relationship now between the state and patrons of schools.
Deputy Healy.
Tánaiste